So what we're going to do is kick off with a view around where cybersecurity becomes cyber safety, maybe some parallels with health and safety, which I think many of us in the industry have maybe touched on over the years. And to do that, then, I'd like to invite Mark Faithfull, CEO and founder of Cool Waters Cyber, to explore the topic. Mark has over 30 years of experience in the cybersecurity industry, instrumental in protecting businesses from digital threats. And under his leadership, Cool Waters Cyber has the accolade of being Cornwall's first NCSC assured service provider, offering trusted security advice and cyber essential certification, amongst other services. He's also committed to fostering high-tech careers, exemplified by the support for the Cornish Cyber Apprentice Scheme. So very influential in our region, a really active member of the cluster, and I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. So we can chop over across to the slides, and then we'll let Mark crack on. Just while we're waiting, because we're going to have a slightly shorter session of 2 presentations and then a panel, we are going to return to some of the other questions that we haven't covered off as a wider panel at the end of the day, and also a bit of roving mic as well. So if somebody wants to discuss something live, we're even going to do that. So just to prepare yourselves. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mum. Glad that you came. Yes. Is it just me, or is it freezing in here? Yes. Okay. So I want to talk about safety. Health and safety in the workplace has undergone a massive transformation over the past 2 centuries. From, I think, maybe the stereotypical image of the chap in the high-vis jacket and the clipboard stood in the corner of the office or annoying everyone, no, you're not allowed to do that, it's not safe, to actually, it's become a core value embraced by most organisations. But it's a journey that took time. It took controversy, it took public outcry to take it from an annoyance to a core value. And it really started off back in the 19th century. So let me tell you a story. Our rapid industrial expansion in Victorian Britain came at a huge cost. It's said that 3 workers died for every mile of railway track that was laid. So next time you journey from Exeter to London, that's quite a lot of people died to make that journey possible. In fact, one notorious project was the Woodhead Tunnel. There's 3 of them now, but originally the first Woodhead Tunnel. 32 workers died, 140 were seriously injured cutting that first tunnel on the outskirts of Manchester. And shockingly, another 28 people, family members of the workers, died in the squalid conditions of the living conditions that were put there because there was a cholera outbreak. And what really kind of galvanised public opinion was when somebody noticed that actually, if you compare the life expectancy of a worker on the Woodhead Tunnel with a soldier in the Battle of Waterloo, you were more likely to come home alive from the Battle of Waterloo than you would have been as a worker cutting tunnels on the Victorian Railway. So that kind of started a bit of a cultural change and a demand that employers should start to take care of their people. But it wasn't really until 1974 that the world really changed. So we had the Health and Safety at Work Act was brought into place. And this was kind of revolutionary because it moved the way that we dealt with health and safety legislation from a set of narrow, kind of prescriptive, specific rules for certain situations to a broad goal-setting approach that basically put this duty of care on employers that so far as reasonably practicable, they had a duty of care to protect their employees, their contractors, and members of the public. It led to the development of things like internal safety management systems, the need to report near misses, the development of metrics and measurements and KPIs and all these kinds of things. And it had an impact. By 1981, to use the construction industry as an example, the number of fatalities per year had dropped by 30% compared to when the Act was first introduced in 1974. And the number of fatalities in construction annually halved again by the time we get to 2023. But we're running a bit ahead of ourselves, because the next thing that happened to really shift the way we think about safety and the way businesses approach safety was the Piper Alpha disaster in 1988. And this kind of, the report that came out at the back end of Piper Alpha is the thing that introduced the vocabulary safety culture into the corporate lexicon in the UK. Lord Cullen, he led the public inquiry, kind of published his reports about a year after the accident. And he exposed some catastrophic failures of management, of leadership, of basic systems design that led to the multiple fatalities on Piper Alpha. And it led to some sweeping changes in the way that all these things were adopted. And fundamentally, it was the recognition that you need to have an ingrained culture of safety to manage these things, not isolated processes. Well, today, the UK boasts one of the lowest rates of worker fatalities in all of Europe. So we're clearly doing something right. And I think the last piece of the puzzle was in 2007. We were talking about the pointy end of the stick earlier, weren't we, about regulation makes a difference. And I think in health and safety it really has. So in 2007, we had the Corporate Manslaughter and Homicide Act came into place. Okay, and this basically made it possible for a company to be prosecuted rather than an individual for systematic failures. And the key bit of thinking that was kind of enshrined within this act, and it kind of drifted into our culture as well, is this idea that accidents are caused by the failures of systems, not by the failures of people. So when something goes wrong, the problem is the system, not the person. Okay, so this kind of brought in this idea of system-related thinking. This is how we manage stuff. This is how we make it better. We put systems into place. If we're going to put systems into place, that naturally leads to the question, well, what does a good system look like? And so we see the rise of formal standards being introduced. We see ISO 45001, which was the health and safety standard that was released in 2018, and it was kind of an evolution of something that was published in the UK back in 1999. But it kind of cemented this idea that culture is important. Systems are what stop things going wrong. And when things do go wrong, it's the system that's at fault, not the person. If systems are what protect you, you need to define what does a good system look like. And that's where the move to embrace standards really kind of came from. And that's what I would call the first safety revolution. Yeah, it was the revolution in physical safety. It took us about 200 years to get there, but now we are. And the UK is now one of the safest places to go to work. So things started to change again back in 2018. So a lady called Amy Edmondson, she published a book called The Fearless Organisation, Creating Psychological Safety in the Workplace. And it started a discussion and a shift in corporate and organisational thinking. And we started to want to have our workplaces and our organisations to be the sort of place where people felt safe to speak up, where speaking up suddenly is seen as a virtue, not being a troublemaker. Yeah, this is kind of where that shift in culture started to come from. It became a good thing to report a near miss. It became a good thing to point out that there's a weakness in a system so that the system can get fixed. We start to see phrases like see something, say something come into our cultures. If you see something that's wrong, fix it. Don't wait for there to be an accident. Yeah, report smoke, not fires. And we start to see another shift as well, where health and safety starts to become health and safety and well-being. Because if people don't feel safe here and here, they're not going to feel like they can speak up. So fostering a positive mental and emotional culture becomes important for driving the behaviours we want to encompass physical safety as well. These things are related. We begin to understand how mental health impacts physical safety. Yeah, we understand that people who are distracted at work, whether the cause of the distraction, the stress comes from work or comes from home, makes them more likely to have an accident, or makes them more likely to have a co-worker that's involved in an accident. But it also starts to bring into focus, well, what does mental health look like? And using the construction sector again as an example, in 2020, the suicide rate for people working in construction was 3.7 times higher than the national average. So for an industry that had pioneered physical safety and kind of brought it into the national consciousness, actually there was a crisis when it comes to mental safety. And there was a charity called Helping the Hard Hat, so they ran a campaign and they revealed that in 2021, on average, 2 construction workers were taking their own lives every working day of the year. So something needed to change. And so another evolution of the standards was we saw ISO 45003, the definition of health and safety is expanded to talk about psychological health and safety. And this, I think, is the second safety revolution, where we're saying actually it's not just about physical safety, it's about mental safety as well, because these two things are interrelated. Performing poorly in one affects the other. So we've got physical safety, we've got mental safety. What comes next? What's the other piece of the puzzle that we can address? Well, according to our own Information Commissioner's Office, if you look at the thing behind the thing behind the thing, what was the root cause? What was the spark that lit the blue touch paper? They reckon that 90% of all cyber data breaches are caused by human error. And our own NCSC says actually positive cyber security culture is essential because it's people that make an organisation secure, not just technology. So there's a human element to all of this. There's a human element to all of this. So if we think about the way that physical and mental safety has been managed in our organisations, and we start to map that to how we today are managing cybersecurity, what are the sorts of things we talk about? We say, well, we need board-level commitment to health and safety. We say we need board-level commitment to cyber. Yeah, hello, Mr. CISO, a role that didn't used to exist, but it's that board-level responsibility for cyber. We report near misses on the construction site. We report near misses in cyber, don't we? Report a phishing email that came in. Report when someone made a mistake. We almost sent this unencrypted spreadsheet full of GDPR data, but we caught it. We report this kind of stuff. We have fire drills in the office. We do cyber drills to make sure our incident response plans are up and running. We have an ISO standard to define what health and safety looks like. You're doing a good job. We have an ISO standard for cyber security. I think you kind of make my point. We have ongoing training. It all aligns. It's all the same. And I think this is the third revolution, cyber safety. And my encouragement to us all today is that when we step out of the nerd closet and we're not talking to one another, we're starting to talk to the business, let's talk about cyber safety, not cyber security or cyber awareness. Let's talk about cyber safety, because people understand what safety means. We've got 200 years of cultural thought development that goes behind this idea of safety is everyone's responsibility. We understand that safety is a good thing. We understand that everyone can learn something about safety. And cyber safety, like physical and mental, is just another aspect of safety. Cyber security is something that the IT department has to manage. Cyber safety is everyone's responsibility. I think if we change the vocabulary, we can change the conversation. So let me give you a practical example. So I was involved in a big construction project, the A303 bypass, before our new Chancellor decided to cancel it because you couldn't find enough 50p's down the back of the sofa. But while that project was up and running, one of the things that we did was develop an integrated safety culture. So this was a project that was going to have 2,000 people on site spread across Salisbury Plain, digging tunnels, doing lots of kind of physical work on the inside and the outside. And so we had this integrated approach to safety. So there was going to be a reporting app for near misses and security incidents, and whether it was a physical safety incident, whether it was a mental safety incident, whether it was a cyber safety incident, one app, one touch point, one reporting mechanism, one dashboard up to the board that said, safety, this is what's going on. If you ever worked in construction or a related industry, they had this concept of a toolbox talk at the start of the day when everyone kind of gathers around. They do it in rail and places like that as well. And that you talk about, this is what we're doing on site, here are the risks, here are the tools that we're using, make sure everyone's trained up, all that kind of stuff. And that concept moved into all meetings. So if you go into a meeting at Network Rail, you go to a meeting at Costains, they'll probably start the meeting with a safety moment. And when you've been doing that for a few years, there's only so many times you can have a conversation with the accounts department about how they can park safely in the corporate car park before you're kind of repeating yourself. But if you broaden this concept of safety, and actually, well, our safety moment, we might talk about physical safety in the office, or we might talk about mental safety, or we might talk about cyber safety, because it's all just safety. And it allows you to have a broader conversation, and it helps you have better ongoing engagement with the team. So modern safety culture is about keeping people safe at home and at work, and the skills used in one transfer to another. I mean, if you get taught how to use a tool safely at work, right, you're going to be safer when you're doing your DIY at home. And if we train people to be safe with their cyber at work, they are less likely to fall for that phishing scam at home. And they can transfer those skills to their mums and their aunties and their granddads and those kinds of people. And so we are spreading the concepts of cyber safety more broadly within the economy, more broadly within society, which is a very good thing. The UK government lists a number of tier 1 threats to national security. On that list is, number 1, terrorism. Number 2, cybercrime and cyber fraud. The government sees it as an equally important threat to our nation. So the more we can do to teach people how to be cyber safe at work, all of those skills are completely transferable to home and to everyone else in their broader family. What we learn at work, we can take home with us. What we learn at home comes to work, doesn't it? And because it's all connected, if you just think about this as an example, now if someone is feeling stressed or distracted for whatever, it could be the root cause might be at home, the root cause might be at work, are they more likely to fall victim to that phishing email? Maybe. And if they do, what's the impact? The cyber vigilance of the organisation goes down. Maybe the organisation is subject to a cyber attack, and depending on what the organisation does for a living, that could impact the physical safety of other people in the organisation. If you're in construction, or if you're running a factory and suddenly the computers that control the robots aren't behaving, you can see how all this stuff is interrelated, can't you? If we can stop seeing safety, physical, mental and cyber, as silos, but part of an integrated fabric, I think we would serve ourselves, our organisations and society much better. It is all just safety. So how can you roll out this kind of integrated approach as we round off? Well, first of all, we can think about when we do briefings and we talk about safety, we talk about physical safety, mental safety, we talk about cyber safety. If you've got less repetition in your training, you're going to be more efficient with the time, so you can kind of get it built into people's agendas, but you're going to get better efficacy because you've got less repetition going on. You're talking about a more variety of things, so people are going to be more interested. When it comes to reporting safety within your organisation, think about integrated KPIs. Yeah, an incident, a near miss, a training completion. Report that for safety, regardless of the silo. Yeah, see it as all as an integrated thing. Maybe we'll even get to the point where we have integrated governance. We'll have a chief safety officer who underneath is responsible for physical, mental, and cyber safety behind the scenes. Integrated training, integrated inductions, integrated reporting. So the ISO standards, if you play with them, you know they all integrate, they dovetail very nicely. An integrated management system is not very hard to run. It covers all of these areas. Now, of course, once you work your way down into some of the detail, there's some very distinct skills in physical safety, you know, working at height, working at depth, mental health, first aiders, cyber security. We've got our own technical disciplines. But I think up in the boardroom, they're all just risks to be managed, right? It's just a risk management exercise. So your chief safety officer can oversee all of those things. Yeah, safety is everyone's responsibility. This has just been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of a thought process. If you're interested to know a bit more, you can see the full report on our website. It's free to download. You're welcome to grab a copy. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be back on the panel for questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, I can't speak for others, and I'm sure it will come up in the panel, but the clarity of thought and the parallels clearly with history and things we've been done was absolutely brilliantly delivered. Really enjoyed that. And I think it sets the scene really well for our next brief on a similar vein. Actually, it steps right from this to look in a lot more detail at the sort of construction side of things. So I'd like to welcome John Farley, an Associate Director at Arup, to help us navigate the topic. With over 16 years of experience in defence, security and counter-terrorism, John leads Arup's resilience, security and risk team, is a trusted advisor, project director and team leader, has a diverse background including protective design, risk management and cybersecurity applied globally to projects, and also a chartered mechanical engineer with a PhD in materials science. So I think, you know, in this session, looking forward to John making it really real around how cyber and other sort of industries such as construction interrelate. So thank you.
Wonderful. Great to see you all. I've got the last shift of the day, so I'll be as dynamic as I can. And not controversial with my jokes, I promise. So some of the topics I just wanted to talk through, it's going to be picking up off some of the great stuff that Mark said and hopefully pulling together some of the threads from the conversations that we've been having today. But to talk to you a little bit around some of the trends that we're seeing in the physical world, which is the space in which the business that I work for works, Arup. Some case studies, talking a bit about, blended threats, some case studies, and then the need for system thinking, which I'll be honest, I think has already been pretty well delivered, but I'm going to add a little bit to that, hopefully, and then some applications for us. So I thought I'd start with a confession. I hear it's cathartic to confess these things in front of an audience of people that don't know you. I'm a massive fan of Britain's Got Talent, all those kind of things. Now, I appreciate that could be considered pretty embarrassing context. Why am I a massive fan? For me, it's not about the car crash television that maybe some people like. It's not about the terrible performances. For me, it's about the amazing creativity that some people can come out with. So ordinary individuals, or perceived to be ordinary individuals, come forward with immense creativity and immense talent that maybe doesn't come quite across from the initial expectations. A couple of great examples, two people that I really like, well worth looking up. John Vines, 60-year-old guitar teacher from Bournemouth, absolute rocker. Definitely worth having a look at his audition. He goes from very normal, slightly boring-looking individual to absolutely incredibly talented, absolutely rocking it out. Or 5-year-old Chrysius, who is so short he has to stand up to play the drums, is actually an incredible drummer to the point that you could imagine him quite rapidly playing, in any number of bands. Two completely different individuals, different ages, different demographics, incredibly talented, what's my point? The space that I work in is around counter-terrorism. My background's in blast engineering, actually. I used to do blast protection, or still do blast protection. And I've moved from that protective security world into cyber security, because what we're seeing in the built environment in which we work, in which I work, in which we live in, this building that we're in right now, is increasingly digitally connected. And that is becoming an increasing threat profile for us within the world. Great book. If I believed that Donald Trump could read, then I would suspect he's read this book. There may be like a children's picture version, perhaps, that he's picked up. But The Weaponization of Everything is a very interesting book, and it really talks about the concepts. And Heather mentioned it a little bit earlier, I think. The weaponization, a human creativity to take something that was designed for one thing and turn it into something else, is absolutely extraordinary. And I think, so how this links back to Britain's Got Talent, it should be no surprise to us. People have got great talents, and we see that. It's monetized into a TV program which millions of people watch. But strangely, we seem to lose the connection, I think, to believe that some people can use this creativity for nefarious and dangerous purposes. But believe me, they do. And that's what we see in the world around us all the time. And that might be because our perception as, you know, as good people on the good side is, why would you do that? Believe me, they do, and there's lots of incentives. My question really is, are our defences creative enough? Do we really think about, someone mentioned, you know, Black Mirror thinking, do we really think about scenarios that could take place? Do we really think about how creative people might be to attack our organisations, to attack our infrastructure, to attack our nation? I'm not sure that we always do. And some of the space that I work in is trying to help organisations think about that and think about what might go wrong. So we now live in the age of AI, and that's just a force multiplier as far as I'm concerned. It's a bigger calculator, it's an amplifier, it's a bigger lever, whatever analogy you feel is most appropriate. But what does it create? Rapid vulnerability assessments, access to huge amounts of data to do threat intelligence and get lots more information about organizations that previously wasn't easily accessible or may not have been easily accessible. We release a lot of information online, both on a personal level, but also on an organizational level, that I don't think we always understand the impacts of that. And what AI enables people to do, of course, is to compound all of that information together and build a better understanding of vulnerabilities in a way that I don't think we've really seen before. And we are seeing it being used in an impactful way in the world around us. So it brings this information together. It can turn people that can't code into people that can code. It can automate things very quickly. So it increases the capability of individuals. So we say that threat is intent plus capability equals threat. What we're seeing is intent isn't changing, capability is increasing rapidly, therefore the threat must increase with it. So let's talk about some blended threat scenarios. So this is an image that was taken out of a report from the EU, looking at the Ukraine conflict. And what they saw was a direct overlay of denial of service attacks. Let's just, for the capability to say cybersecurity incidents, at the same time as physical incidents were occurring in the country at the same time for the Ukraine invasion. So a direct and active correlation between physical and cybersecurity incidents to generate that force multiplier, to generate that opportunity to increase the challenge. And we've seen that on a number of different occasions. We've obviously seen as well a massive rise in some technologies, such as drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, that kind of technology. That has changed enormously over the last 5 years, and that brings with it a completely different threat scenario that we hadn't seen to date. Now, does anyone see on the news, I think it was just last week, in China, a number of androids that completed a marathon, the first time ever that's happened. Now, I don't necessarily want people taking my credit card details. I agree, that is a concern. But what I really don't want is have to deal with cyborgs and humanoids. But that technology is coming. Genuinely, that is coming. I'm not scaremongering you. That technology is coming rapidly. Have a look at what Boston Dynamics is doing. That's very interesting. Imagine what the Chinese state is doing with that technology as well. So that's happening right now. The space that we work in is in the built environment. So buildings like this that we're sat in right now, which has got a lot of connected infrastructure in it. air conditioning systems, fire suppression systems, lighting systems, access control, as in, locking doors. All of these systems are becoming increasingly connected, and for the right reasons. We want to be able to control them remotely. We want to monitor them. We want to utilize that technology. We actually, some buildings are hermetically sealed ultimately, so they're completely sealed so that we can manage the environment for energy reduction reasons. So air's circulated, the temperature's controlled. All of that is automated in a controlled system. And what we're seeing, Dragos provides an annual report on what we would call operational technology. It's a pretty broad term, but it does cover these kind of threats and issues, as we are seeing an increasing number of threats towards what we'd call operational technology. So the built environment technology that we're talking about, that could be factories that are running machines to do, run widgets. It could be air conditioning systems, HVAC systems, for data centers, where obviously heating and cooling is incredibly important. It could be fire suppression systems in your buildings. There's been some incidents of building systems being attacked to create an evacuation from that building. So the office block that you're working in, the fire system goes off, it's hacked, and it evacuates the whole building, so that potentially an additional threat can then take place as a result of everyone spilling out of a building into a controlled space. We've seen these kind of issues. It's happening in the real world. This threat is real and it is increasing. A couple of examples, just to bring a few things in. In 2019, a company called Coalfire Labs were paid to do a physical penetration test on a courthouse in the US. And they were quite successful. So they used standard techniques of tailgating. You can get anywhere in a high-vis, a hard hat, and a clipboard. You'd be surprised what buildings you can get into using those kind of techniques. They gained access to the server rooms through sort of physical means. They actually found a set of keys in a control room that they managed to get access to, and they were able to access all kinds of confidential information. So a physical attack resulting in a loss of digital information. Now, they were actually arrested because of even though they were paid to do the job and signed a contract, for some discrepancy between state ownership and federal ownership, but that's what we get in America, right? They were released, but be warned, not an area to enter into as a business opportunity, I'd suggest. A couple of years ago, a financial institution was hacked with a drone that was fitted with a microcomputer and an internet network sniffer. Now, what they did was they managed to sniff out the network earlier in the week. They scooped up someone's MAC address, so it was a legitimate user, and then mirrored their MAC address, faked their MAC address, landed on the roof of the building and got into the network. Now, the network wasn't secured. It was segregated, but it wasn't secured. And the reason it wasn't secured, because the belief was it had no physical access because of the position it was inside the building and inside the estate. Well, it had no physical access until a drone landed on the roof, was then able to access it, and then able to access all the financial information that was being moved around that network, right? These things happen. I could see your face. These things happen. They do happen. The British Museum, just earlier this year, you might have seen this on the news, they lost their ticketing server for 3 days. Now, they let a contractor go, an IT contractor go. Termination of a contract, I'd suggest it probably wasn't amicable based on the outcome of this, but terminated the contract of that user. They were removed from the IT system, good first move, but they were not removed from the physical access system. So they turned up the next day, got into the server room, turned all the servers off. Interesting idea. Took them 3 days to get the whole system back on again. Now, maybe not critical for a museum. Now, I'm a believer in the arts, but maybe this is not a life-critical issue. But it could have been in the right context, right? And what it's providing us with examples of the disconnect between our environment, our physical environment, and the IT environment space in which we're working. Yep. So if you can get into the building to turn the servers off, then firewalls, network segregation, all of those great bits of kit, they're not necessarily going to be particularly valuable to you. Last one. You may have seen this. This was 2 weeks ago, I think. This came out. So some stop walks were hacked in the US. So we don't have them so much, I guess, in the UK here. But if you've been travelling around the world, I spent quite a lot of time in Australia. They adopt a similar policy. So stop walks, you press the button, and they talk at you. So they were hacked to overlay or to change the kind of stop, walk, don't walk with voices like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk saying a variety of sort of propaganda-like messages. Quite amusing, but imagine you're the visually impaired person that relies on the stop walk to understand when it is safe for you to cross the road. That does have quite an impact on your confidence as an individual crossing the road. You're already a vulnerable user. I think it's, whilst it's quite humorous in ways, it's quite a humorous incident, it does have real-world implications. Now, there's no prizes for this. Can anyone guess what the password was on the system that they hacked through Bluetooth? So each individual item can be updated via Bluetooth. Anyone guess what the password was? Good guess. Almost. That would have been more complex, I think. Very good. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Was it you?
Can I just say, I got my internet changed from another provider a couple of days ago. The person actually putting it in told me his password for everything was 1 to 8.
Yeah, great. And it does happen. It still happens. It's incredible. So they've now spent thousands of hours, because they all have to be done manually within Bluetooth range, going across various cities across the US to update the software and change the passwords. Direct physical outputs as associated with cybersecurity issues. This is one of my favorite images. This is from Rob Oldham from Cydia, pointed me in the direction of this. It's not great quality, but really for me, this kind of sums it up. This is the sort of world that I often work in from a physical space. We just completely miss the point. You put the barrier in, but until it snows, you don't realise why you're not getting any parking tickets. Sorry, any parking revenue, because you can simply drive around the barrier. And that's what we see all the time within the world of physical and cyber. We talk different languages, we've got different job roles, never the two shall meet. IT and cybersecurity falls under the IT manager, physical security falls under the facilities manager. It never relates, but we don't live like that anymore in the world. And the NCSC CAF, if anyone's looked at that, it clearly covers a variety of different things, including physical security, and considering the physical security of your cybersecurity elements, because if you can get into the server room, then the rest of it's pointless. So picking up again on Mark's point, people, process, and technology, this is the space in which we encourage people to think. We need to be thinking around the people and how they use it, the process that they can access the information and do the things they need to do, and the technology that's deployed to protect it. And I would agree with Mark in many ways that I think the people actually is probably 3 times as big as the others in many ways, but to provide you with some context. People, process, and technology. We need to be thinking about systems, thinking about how we work with our systems around us, and considering the vulnerabilities. So maybe you've got one of these job functions. Maybe you're an ops manager. Maybe you're a CISO. Maybe you're a general manager or a director. Maybe you're on the board of an SME. Maybe you're an HR manager. Maybe you're a facilities manager. How can we think about people and process and technology collectively as one organization? In fact, as one group of people here, as one group of experts, because that's really where we're going to see the issues. So my parting gift, when you get on public transport to go home, if that's what you're going to do, and you look down, mind the gap, because it's the gaps between these spaces that these issues occur, okay? So we need to be working holistically as a team. We need to be working holistically as a business, if that's the space in which you work. If you're a consultant or an advisor, a bit more like myself, encourage people to think about the holistic system and mind the gap, because it's the gap that will trip you up, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thanks, John. John, Mark, do you want to join me back over here? I'll bring some extra mics. So I think that's a really great place to start the conversation, which is the gap. Let's just put this on.
Move over here so that there isn't a gap.
Yeah. Well, just a small gap. By the way, if you have any more questions, please do add them, because we're just curating them at the moment. We've only got a few. But if there's something more, or you want to put your hand up later on, then we'll do that. Okay, so slightly two different sides, I think, of a similar coin. But let's start with the gap and the silos, and you mentioned silos as well, Mark. Both, two great, really visual examples there: the stop-walk piece and the whole and that barrier piece. And I think, Mark, you were talking about systems thinking around culture, system, and people. And around actually starting to look at those holistically, and you get an example of a real-world project you worked on where that was done. But my first question, I think, is there's bits of good practice, but there's clearly lots of gaps. Okay, what are the things that we need to do in our organisations to move from the silos to a joined-up view? Practical measures that we can take, and it maybe builds a little bit. Mark, maybe you'd like to start building a little bit more on what you were talking about around the integration of systems.
Sure, okay. So I think one of the changes that it would be good to get to is, I think the third evolution of safety is still not quite there. I think if we think about physical safety and mental safety, in my experience, in most organisations, it is a value that's truly embraced, and people care about it, and they want to make it happen. I think in many organisations today, cybersecurity is still in that category of if we have to, rather than a core value that's been embraced because it's the right thing to do. Yep. Certainly in the sector that my business operates in, we do certifications. 90% of our customers come to us because someone else has told them that they need to have a certificate on the wall, not because they decided it was the right thing for their business to do. So I think there's still a little bit of a heart and mind journey to go from that perspective to get cyber safety from the compliance-driven, least we can do, what's the least money we can spend, compared to where we are today with the more people-centric stuff, which is, in I think most organisations, more embraced, hearts and minds wise.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to the cyber industry approach in a second, because I think that would be a good second question. But firstly, John, I mean, so clearly you've identified aspects of where this is a real issue still within the built environment and the way things are being progressed. But are you seeing a change in the way that programs are delivered to be more joined up? I mean, are people cognizant of this issue? And how are what practical things are you doing to change that?
I think we are starting to see some progress and change in the cybersecurity and the physical realm. They're both becoming more conjoined in the way they operate, but also in the way that people think about them, which I think is helping. I think I'm an advocate of one of the things that Mark suggested, which is that sort of chief safety officer. We would typically, use, say, chief risk officer, which is something that we're starting to see grow again in that sort of board space, where organisations are seeing that cybersecurity is just another risk, like financial assurance or financial stability, like physical security, all of those things. And having someone at the top of that, I think that owns all of it is really good. I think CISOs are a great role, but I think they can be a little bit too focused on IT and not enough on the more holistic challenges that I think we're seeing with these systems, these systems together. So I think it's trying to bring all of that together. We are seeing definitely an increasing understanding in that. And as I mentioned, the CAF being updated to increase physical security, the cyber assessment framework is a really good marker, I think, to say that the technology industry, the information technology industry, is identifying physical needs. I think maybe what we've not seen so much of, although the NPSA, anyone who follows the National Protective Security Agency, they have provided some information called CAPS, which is a bit of a mouthful, but that's the cybersecurity of physical systems. So we're seeing both sides of the fence, as it were, thinking about the other person's domain, which is really positive. It's about bringing that together, I think, at a projects level, at a risk management level, and helping people work together on it.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little contentious then, and I wonder, though, how much of the problem we're talking about has been made by us in our own cyber industry, right? I think, Mark, you paralleled, going back hundreds of years, that there's some really good models around how you improve these things, and that there's good parallels that you could apply to this industry, and yet only now are we thinking about it in those terms? So is it that, was there an element that this is new, it's different, it's not like the rest of it, we're special, and we need to manage it in our own way? I mean, just a personal
A
perspective.
lot of us are very special, let's be honest.
Well, indeed. I fear that now we're suddenly realising, okay, we can't play on our own anymore, and maybe that's why that's been part of the problem we've had, right? We've tried to do everything on our own and realised that this has got to be joined up.
I think part of it is also about learning to communicate with humans. I think because cybersecurity was born a technical child, and so it comes from that very kind of technical root, we've kept a very technical vocabulary. We've kept a very technical way of talking about what we do. And so we like to talk about our technology, which is only accessible and interesting to a very small subset of the rest of the human population. And so it's a part of it is about learning to communicate more effectively, and to talk about outcomes rather than the bits and the bytes, and understand what is it that we do. It's about understanding what is the thing that we do that sits behind the thing that sits behind the thing. What does Google do? You ask people, what does Google do? Most people would say, well, they're a search engine. No, they're not. They're an advertising company. They just do search engine as a way of getting the ads in front of you. And so if you ask a cybersecurity person, what do you do? Well, I'm a pen tester, I'm a hacker. Or I make sure that the trains run on time. I make sure airplanes don't fall out of the sky. I keep people safe. I make sure the money stays in your bank account.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. The actual output of your activity, and I think that was the challenge which people had with dealing with cyber risks in the early days, because it wasn't the fact that it was a cyber-related risk; it was what was the output, and the people in those terms. Okay, great, thank you. There's a few questions actually that have popped in. You can actually see them on the board there now over there, but I'm just going to pick as we go. But feel free to put your hands up. There's a comment around aviation. You didn't particularly mention that, Mark, in your presentation, but I wonder, around whether that was further ahead than others, because I think their safety critical culture and the sort of near miss reporting and the like, which is what's been highlighted here, was obviously been in existence for quite a while. I mean, are they the leaders in this?
I think so. There might be some other industries, maybe nuclear. I think kind of rail is in some aspects following close as well. But yeah, aviation definitely, and I do hear people talking about taking some of the models of aviation and applying it. So one of the things they talk about in aviation safety is Swiss cheese. So if you look at a piece of Swiss cheese, it looks like you can't kind of move from left to right, but if you turn it just right and the holes line up, then you can get from one side to the other. And so that's when things go wrong, when actually you've got all the systems in place, but they've all got a little defect, but when they line up together, and so three things that are not supposed to happen do happen, that's when things go wrong. And so that mentality is starting to come through for sure. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn from aviation, to be sure.
Is that something that gets looked at in your sort of industry, John? The sort of aviation parallels, or?
To an extent, I guess we often use the term defence in depth, which I think is the same sort of analogy, isn't it? It's looking at how can you have multiple controls and understand if one control fails, do you have backup, and do you have that redundancy? So absolutely, I think that's existed in the physical realm for quite a long time. The concept of outside in, or looking at what they call like an onion-based model again. That sort of that concept of trying to protect the enclave and having multiple stages outside. So that in a physical realm, absolutely. In a cyber realm, I think potentially less so. I think we have become a little bit reliant in some cases on very specific technological outcomes, and again, not considering some of the other potential adverse impacts from other areas.
I think the key thing is aviation really understands the human factor, because that's what it's all about. Was the pilot too tired? Was he distracted? That kind of thing. And I think when we in cyber appreciate the human factor a bit more, because the systems that go wrong, it was a human that made the mistake in programming the firewall. It was a human that made the error in the code that allowed these things to happen. It was a human that clicked on the phishing link.
So can I just hang on that point for a second? Because during your presentation, you talked around culture, system, people, but in health and safety, it's not the person that's the problem, it's the process, right? Was that I think that was the point. And yet within cyber, we've taken a view that the largest problem, my word, not that of others, is that it's the way that people interact with the systems. And therefore so much focus goes on education awareness and training and the like, but is that not hiding imperfect systems? Are we putting enough effort into the culture and the system, or are we actually, sort of hiding those problems because we're focusing too much on the people?
I think it's because it's the other way around.
Okay.
I think that the thinking when you come from a health and safety, that kind of system perspective, that the good systems compensate for the mistakes that people make.
Got it. Okay.
Right. Where in cyber, we're compensating for poor systems by trying to train the people to compensate for it.
Okay, that's really clearly put. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think if you were compare, with that conversation earlier around, we've progressed rapidly with the development of technology and technology solutions, and we've broken some things.
Yeah.
I think, people have said before, if the aviation industry operated like the tech industry, then no one would be flying anywhere because planes would fall out of the sky, multiple times a day. So there is a level, I think, that we've, for competitive reasons, driven forward with great excitement to develop all sorts of technology, but I'm not sure that we're holding technology providers accountable for the gaps within their systems. I think we are blaming people when ultimately, potentially, it could be a vendor-based issue.
Got it. Okay, that's interesting. And as you mentioned gaps, I'm going to ask you if you can answer the question that's up there, which I think was a bit more explanation around the mind the gap. If you're not a regular on the tube, you may not necessarily have picked up on it.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I guess, for me, the gap is between that people, process and technology. That's where we see the challenges in organisations. It's really trying to help people think more holistically. So that's what I'm referring to as the gap that people need to be cognizant of, that people need to be aware of. And and if you're in a position of authority working within an organisation, then build those barriers across the silos, build those barriers across the departments. Break those barriers, build those relationships, so that we can work together more collectively. And I think in some organisations, actually, the shift in thinking around budgets really helps. So sometimes, IT are often saying, well, we don't have enough money to do the things we want to do. HR are saying, we don't have enough money to do what we do. But if you work collectively and compound that budget, potentially there's an ability there to work together to build the right systems as an organisation that work across all of those. Add facilities to that. It's that sort of collective thinking is really what I'd like to see us progress more with.
Got it. Thank you. There's another really good question here, which I think might benefit from a bit of explanation if someone's willing to put their hand up to it and I can get them a mic. And it was around this anticipatory regulatory action. And I think the question is saying, what can we do to improve the situation within the cyber domain before the regulation and accountability has to hit as hard as it did in health and safety. And I think that brings up what I think, Jeff, you were maybe talking around regulatory action. Is it your question? Okay, there we go then. Do you want to just spell it out a bit more? Do you want a mic? Here you go. You're going to have to answer.
Generous. No, I was just intrigued because the health and safety story is a really powerful one, but it took a lot of time. And in reality, it wasn't until a lot of people died that regulatory action came in, and that's precisely what Chris said in the first talk this morning. Is that regulation is the last course of action for government. They don't really want to be seen as the nanny state. But given the speed of change, and also given Nigel's talk in the first session as well, about AI, and how at the moment we're only thinking about guidance, right? We're lots of lovely guidance. If only everybody was nice and didn't care about the bottom line. But actually, society perhaps needs a bit more anticipatory action, as we discussed in the second session. So that was kind of my question is, in order for that safety culture mark to actually come forward in the cyber domain, do we need regulatory support as an anticipatory push sooner rather than later?
Well, I think it will. I mean, it sort of is coming. So if you fail in your data protection obligations as a business, then you can be fined under GDPR, and the Information Commission Office in the UK will fine the business. So there are there are regulatory penalties if you're not doing the job properly. It's more of an exception rather than the rule at the moment, but at some point the calculus in the boardroom will go, you know what, it'll be more expensive, it's cheaper to do it properly. And I think that's the point of regulatory fines, isn't it? The other thing that we're starting to see, and it's, you know, it starts in America and it follows here, but we're starting to see that now in the States, where you get corporate officers being criminally prosecuted for failures of cyber. So when there's like a big data breach or something, and it's like, well, you knew it was rubbish and you did nothing about it to save money, type of thing. So, and I think that's the mentality that gave us the Corporate Manslaughter Act. You know, so I think we'll see that evolution come again. It will make it even less fun to be a CISO if you could end up going to jail for a cyber breach when you're like, oh, but they won't give me any money. You know, that'll be the challenge. But this is the path that people walked in health and safety, and so I think the models are there.
Okay, right. Looking at the questions, I think the interesting question around turbine engines would be fascinating, but I'm going to put it out of vogue because I'm not sure it's particularly relevant to this conversation, but we can come back to it maybe at the end. We may have time. I would like to look at the next one, not so much around the cabling and IT audit, but there's a really good question in there about the most unexpected physical world impediment to better cyber security that the panel has found. So, do we understand the question, or would we like some further explanation? I guess it's something that has stopped, you know, that if you're building in that built environment world, what actually could stop you from, however hard you wanted to make your cybersecurity better for that project, maybe in a hyper-connected building of some sort, what sort of things are going to prevent you getting to nirvana? Sounds like a John start, I think.
Yeah, that's a difficult one to answer in some ways. I think I think the biggest sort of challenges that we see are, I guess, around the safety environment. So the critical national infrastructure environment, where the environment is inherently it's a dangerous place from a health and safety perspective, and so there's every incentive to provide remote access so that people don't physically have to go there. And that's a fabulous way of trying to resolve the problem. But of course, providing remote access then creates a new set of cyber challenges that have to be resolved. So I think that's probably the area that we see the biggest challenges is where your incentive is around life safety. You don't want to provide access, you want to give remote access, and how do you do that in a sensible, safe and secure way, I think is not always that easy to resolve.
Okay, that's interesting. Mark, from the A303 project that wasn't to be, was there anything there that early days have been identified as a major challenge for cyber?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of the key aha moments we had in the boardroom at the start of the project was because it was if you're not familiar, it was a controversial project because the road or the tunnelling path was relatively close to Stonehenge. Yeah. And so there was a lot of sects of the public that were like, they didn't think that this should go ahead. So there was a lot of focus on physical security. They had like a £1 million physical security budget even before they'd broken ground on the site in terms of kind of protecting what was going on. And that was the focus. It was Mrs. Miggins can go and lie down in front of the bulldozer to stop work happening or chain themselves to a tree. But this was a modern construction project. It was digital first. There was very little paper. It was a big tunnel boring machine that was going to be remotely controlled and all this kind of stuff. And there was a kind of an assumption that sort of made it safe from Mrs. Miggins. And then we had a conversation around in a risk assessment in the boardroom. And I said, well, look, Mrs. Miggins doesn't need to do that. All she needs to do is to reach out to Ivan, who sat in his pants in his mum's basement in Moscow, and for 500 quid, he'll hack anything you point him at. Yeah. So Mrs. Miggins doesn't know how to hack the access control system that tracks where all the people are on this big site. And if that goes down, you have to shut down because you don't know, from a health safety perspective, where people are on this massive compound. She doesn't have to do that, but she does have 500 quid. And so then there was like, okay, now we get it.
Got it. That's really interesting.
And then conversely, I think there was an incident recently in the US, I say recently within the last few years at Sacramento Airport, I believe, where they lost all of their internet services for a couple of days because a chap with a digger just dug up the cable. So that kind of stuff happens all the time. That sort of separation of just not understanding your vulnerability as an organisation, be it cyber or physical.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Right. Just going on down a little bit further. Second one. There we go. Conflict of interest. Well, I'm going to actually put my glasses on, read on my phone, because whilst my long distance isn't too bad, it's not that brilliant. Right. So this is conflict of interest between physical and safety teams, or something around incentives. How would you align your physical and safety when managing building control systems, for example? Does that make sense, John? Do you want more?
Yeah, to an extent, I guess there often are sort of perverse incentives, I think, aren't there, around different parts of the organisation trying to show that their particular area of interest is the most, is the most critical. And Mark, I'm sure you've experienced that when you're doing risk assessments and risk reviews with organisations, that there's an incentive in one organisation saying, well, physical risk is the most important so that they can get the biggest budget, or cyber risk is the biggest so that they can get the biggest budget. So I think there is often a bit of a conflict around that, and I guess that's why we firmly believe that bringing those people together to help them understand how those two things align and how we can all work together for the benefit of everyone. The sum of the parts, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, I guess, is what we're trying to consider from an organisational perspective. So I'm not sure if that's really answering the question, but definitely we have seen that. How do we encourage them to work together? I think it's through that debate and open dialogue to help people try and look at a system-level vulnerability and understand how can we all play a part in reducing the likelihood of those issues. Okay,
great, thank you.
And I think it's also about just remembering why we do what we do. I can't remember if it's in the curriculum for the CISSP, or if it's part of the IC squared fundamentals, but there's this thing about what's the highest objective of a cybersecurity team? What is the highest objective of a cybersecurity team?
Hands up, anyone?
Right. The highest objective of the cybersecurity team is the preservation of human life. Yeah, it's about people, not about data. But I saw this recently on the system I was working on, where the IT team was responsible for installing the access control system. They were security minded, so they'd set it so that if there was a power failure, all the doors locked. Nice. Security first, right? Yeah. But when does power fail? When there's a fire. And you don't want the doors locked. The physical team wants stuff to fail open. The security team wants stuff to fail shut. And we need to remember the priorities, people.
Yeah, and I think that is very easy to sort of lose sight of, particularly under the pressure and stress that some of the teams are operating. Actually, I just wanted to pick up a comment at the bottom, which actually corrects my understanding. So saying that the NCSC philosophy in active cyber defence is all around system and not people as well. I don't think that's necessarily a question, but I think it's a helpful addition to the conversation. Thank you. I want to pick up quickly the one, I know it's a long time ago now, and we're still talking about it a little bit, COVID, but there is an observation here around whether that was a focus that's sort of accelerated, I suppose, that mental safety concept. Certainly, there was an awful lot in the early days around the well-being of remote working teams and so on and so forth. So whilst I think from what you were saying earlier, Mark, clearly that mental safety piece has been building for some time, but that maybe had a really important role to play in putting it the front of the general public. Would that be something that that you'd agree, and have you seen that? And
yeah, I think so. I think it moved it from safety critical industries. Yeah. So it moved it from rail to the accounts department in an office. People working remotely, and it did definitely bring it to the mainstream, I think.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to draw stumps on this panel, I think, at this stage, but I'm going to give a chance for anybody else that wants to make a comment specific to this discussion around cyber safety and the like, please. Yeah. So we'll finish this up, and then for our team at the back, we're going to look at some of the questions we didn't get a chance to look at for session 2, and invite some of the other panelists back in a minute, just to give you a heads up, start thinking about that. Please do.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for a fantastic panel, really, really interesting to hear that coming together, and I think, I couldn't agree more with it. But I'm wondering whether the fact that we're choosing, say, to follow the health and safety route with the terminology that we're using is actually going to lead us down a siloed path. So the maritime sector has been, well, this is the first time you're ever going to hear me say this, been more advanced than other sectors in this sense. They've had safety cultures mandated as part of international regulation for 30 years. The Herald of Free Enterprise incident, that ferry that sunk, that told us that we needed to focus on technology as a safety risk, not a security risk. And that was, better part of 35 years ago now. The fact we also have illegal regulations that give us a clear distinction that safety equals this, security equals this, force the sector to choose a completely different term here. We don't use cybersecurity or cyber safety. It's cyber risk management, because otherwise it goes, well, oh, that's security. And I think you said it yourself, cybersecurity is the IT teams and cyber safety is everybody's responsibility. But that's still siloing it, isn't it? So do we need to come up with a new term that appreciates that it is this holistic approach that John spoke about to get away from those sort of, not negative connotations, but the traditional connotations that are forcing us down that siloed route?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. And actually, it's really, I mean, so you're from Plymouth, aren't you?
Yes.
Cybership Lab, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very interesting, the maritime perspective, parallel actually is quite interesting. Although arguably, and I'm sure you'd not agree with me on this, the maritime has been somewhat slower to take in the cyber elements of it, but even with the IMO code change and the like.
But because they've had that idea of technology and safety being, because they've had that idea that technology and safety have been interlinked for so long, yes, they are very slow to adopt and change.
It's an easier step for them to take.
Yeah, it's easier for them to understand it in that safety lens. If we turn around and says, look, a phishing attack is going to do this to your systems, which means you're not going to be able to sail, you're going to run aground, there's a risk to life. Yeah. That translation for them is so much easier and quicker. So we always point to aviation as the most advanced. But actually in some of these conversations, I'm starting to think actually, the cultural, that safety cultural side of things, that mentality side of things, the maritime might be slightly more advanced than others.
Okay,
which is interesting for me.
I think it's a really interesting perspective, but actually I think your question was around actually, is that the right terminology or is there something else we need to get to? So maybe I'll ask you guys to comment on that.
Yeah, it is a really good question, and I think my thought around the terminology was more around what's the terminology that most people would already intuitively understand. Yeah, and that was kind of where I was coming from. But I think you're right. We can always explain stuff better.
And if the Southwest Cluster could come up with it uniquely and trademark it, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we'd sell those T-shirts, wouldn't we?
We solved the problem that Friday afternoon. Remember, guys and girls, that was amazing. John, sorry.
No, that's right. I was going to say that I think I agree with you, and I think that's why, from our organisational perspective, we really push that Chief Risk Officer terminology, because we think it's all a risk for the business to manage. We're all trying to deal with the closest crocodile as an organisation, aren't we? And for some people that's cyber, for some people that's physical, for some people that's financial. For a lot of people at the moment that's financial. And it's trying to help us kind of manage that. So I agree, I think language can be really, really important. So yeah, maybe it's a great point. Maybe we should look at how other industries are doing it and see if we can pull that together. Certainly something I'll do some research into.
Yeah.
I was just saying, maybe it should be a chief liability officer.
Yeah. but you're then back to language, aren't you? Because in the boardroom you can talk about risk, you can talk about liabilities. When you start trying to engage with your workforce to tell them safety will keep them, they want to understand you want to keep them safe. You start calling them a liability, then they're not going to be motivated to get with the program, are they? I think there was a question over there.
You want one more?
I'll come to you, Jeff. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I was actually talking about this yesterday afternoon in regards to DORA, but actually it was about, and it comes back to a couple of the questions that were raised earlier, so actually it's less about the letter of the regulations and more about the spirit in which those regulations are intended. And it comes back to the message of what we're trying to talk about here of cyber in society, of actually embracing cybersecurity as part of good business and part of good business practice, And actually, it's you do it right, you do it properly, you get it done well, and it's there and it's integral. It's part of the culture of good business, and that for me kind of links all that together. And then actually, you don't need anticipatory regulation. You just have, good practice, and then it's embraced as part of that.
Achim?
Language is definitely a problem here. And as a non-native speaker, that strict separation between safe and security, which I think in hardly any other language exists, is always puzzling to me in English. And I think actually, at least in informal English, secure and safe are being used inconsistently. I never understood why it's financial security and not financial safety. So I think there is an issue that we don't have in other languages that use essentially the same term for both concepts in many overlapping areas. So there might be room for a new term to solve that problem. And maybe just to add, Ross Anderson, who sadly died way too early, a couple of years back started to teach safety and security in his undergrad lectures immediately in the second year as an integrated concept. Because essentially you cannot talk about a safe system, technical system at least, that isn't secure, and the other way around these days. So I think the two concepts definitely need to talk to each other.
Okay, I feel that we could be here until, hell freezes over or something, discussing this one at the moment. It's an important question, and I'm really grateful to the panel for raising it. And clearly, I think it's a principles thing, and the thing I would take away from it, I think there's definitely a view here that says, look, we know that the things need to be integrated, right? Cyber is no longer something special. It's definitely part of business as usual. It's a critical risk to this country. And let's find a way to integrate it more closely and manage it in that way. So I think what we've had this afternoon is some fascinating perspectives on it. And I always, I love the real examples, and I love the historical parallel, which just points out to me every time how bad we are at learning the lessons of the past, and things that we could take forward. But yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you, John. But don't run away. Okay, so we've only got a few questions left on the board, and I'm wary of inviting the wider panel back down to reshift if people don't want to talk to them. So I think we'll do it anyway. So Heather, Andreas, I see you also here, Rowena. We'll bring some extra chairs up. I think that was being worked on. I can stand, and there's one with wheels on over here. Okay, cool. I'll go here. Actually, if I sit closer to the chair, to the screen, I won't need my glasses. No, you're fine. 1, 2. No, it's right. I'll sit on that one then. Doesn't matter. It's probably safer not being on with wheels. Well, thank you. Look at you, absolutely freezing. Do we need to have a PT session in here to get on? You're actually shivering. That's terrible.
Just hot chocolate.
Chocolate will do.
Right, so I'm going to start with what we've got as 1 and 3 on the board, because I think that they both, they're people-based again. So I'm just going to read them out for a sense. First one was, are people more cavalier with their cyber behaviour at work because they think the firewall will keep them safe? I.e., do you know what, not my problem, somebody's built all this to keep safe, I'm going to be fine. And then the third question down, but second I'm going to touch on, which is more specific around directors, but it's talking about this issue of incentives, doing the right thing, behaviour and cultures. So I think how I want to sort of start that, let me think. I'm going to start, I think, with the incentivization question, right? About people doing the right thing. And whilst the question here is directors, we could use it across the board, right? Around people, what is the risk and reward piece? Now, I see Andreas is holding a microphone. It looks a bit like pass the parcel, this. So I don't know, who'd like to start? Rowena. We're going to start with Rowena then.
Yeah, the thing is, people will be people. You can't stop them. most of our organisational structures at the moment are not optimised for the values that society purports to believe in. They are optimised for the marketplace, which is not the same thing at all. So incentives that at least match or outdo the market forces would be a good way. Not sure who's going to pay for that, though. There is, so talking about aviation safety earlier, there was Professor James Reason, who did a lot of research into aviation safety in the 70s. He came up with the concept of the just culture. And this is a culture in which anyone can feel empowered to raise a concern, report a problem, an issue, without fear that they were going to be shot as the messenger or scapegoated or squashed down. And a just culture is one in which low-level employees need to be able to challenge senior management respectfully, obviously. But I think that's a fundamental question about how human relationships and human societies operate. It's not something we're going to change overnight. So I would say, in the interim, mindfulness, as in be mindful of who you are as a person at work and at home. You don't check your soul out when you pass the office door, and build that culture of being mindful of the consequences to actions, and hopefully at some point that will trickle upwards.
Just add, I think that's an excellent point on the just culture, and the Department for Health and Social Care has published guidance on that in NHS context, which I think is much more broadly applicable, and important to note as well that a just culture has accountability in it as well. So it's a very, very powerful concept, and I think the DHSC guidance is excellent on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to draw out the difference at the leadership level between public sector and private. Private sector incentivized by money, right? So if you're going to change the game, you need to address that by balancing the cost-profit equation with some consequence, some benefit. At the moment, every director who gets to that level has a fundamental understanding of their fiduciary responsibilities. They have to, otherwise they wouldn't be there. They don't have to have any responsibility understanding of the cyber domain that they're all operating in, whether they're a digital business or not. And that's why the government is now bringing in guidance that they're trying to nudge towards possible future regulation where executives of boards will have to actually take responsibility for the organizational cyber posture. And I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because it's just started as guidance today. And I don't think businesses know that it's coming. But they better wake up, because it is. Because they don't listen to the guidance, and all the evidence shows me they're not, then the only other next step will be regulation. But how that gets enforced, I don't know. That'll be an interesting one. Whereas on the public sector, you mentioned NHS. Obviously, that's a sector that I'm very familiar with and engaged with, and I track. And unfortunately, they have a whistleblowing policy that just doesn't work, as is evidenced by almost every single major whistleblower that has blown the whistle inside the NHS. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their careers, they've lost their houses, they've lost children. Their lives have been destroyed by the apparatus of public sector management. So that's, we've got a fundamental cultural problem. And shifting that towards doing the right thing, I don't know. How do we do that?
What's in it for me?
What's in it for me actually ends up being the answer to the question, I think.
So maybe then if we sort of sweep in the other question, which was around individuals' behaviour at work and this sort of sense of security, because again, it's around the same thing, right? We want our teams, our people, to do the right thing as well, and not have a reliance or try and shift the blame. So I don't know. I'd be interested to know whether anyone's got an awareness of an organisation where they've moved from a sort of carrot and stick, compliance training, punishment approach to an incentivization, positive one, either celebrating good practice, or rewarding, good behaviour. Any thoughts around that? Anybody seen anything like that? Willing to take comments from the floor?
I have seen really good practice in terms of encouraging employees to think about their personal digital footprint as well. And it reminds me of the point that John was making about thinking about cyber and physical holistically. I think we need to think about work and personal security holistically as well. And we're not always as good as we could be at that in a lot of organisations, but I have seen examples of very, very good practice. And I think if we all think more holistically about our cyber or physical safety, at work and outside of work, NPSA that you mentioned, they have really good guidance on that from a holistic perspective.
And just to come back on Jeff's comment earlier around incentives in the boardroom, we are seeing some market incentives starting to move with the way that the government is pushing cyber essentials, because we're starting to see supply chain pressure being placed on businesses where actually, if you want to trade and you haven't got the certificate, you can't. So if you want to be a supplier to the public sector, you've got to have cyber essentials. And we saw that announcement a couple of months ago with a couple of the big banks. They basically said their entire supply chain, if you want to be on our supply chain, you've got to have cyber essentials, full stop. And so we might see some of those things starting to move the needle up, perhaps.
I was just thinking that there is a parallel perhaps to the way we deal with carbon credits. So I think one of the ways as an industry we've improved our position around progressing towards carbon neutral is including that as part of a procurement exercise from government contracts, social value, all of those kind of things are starting to get brought into how we procure and how we run major infrastructure programs, including, as I say, carbon credits. So maybe there's something to be said for cyber credits. I don't think that's necessarily the best branding, so I don't recommend you take that one on. But that kind of concept around how do we demonstrate as an organisation that we are cyber secure, that we're thinking about this, that we're putting actions in place. Maybe there's something there.
Where's the other mic, second mic? Oh, you've got it. Okay.
Yeah, it just made me think, of course, the title of the event is Cyber in Society and ESG Exploration, and perhaps we just need to go back to some of that, because there are plenty of businesses out there that want to do good, and they just need help. And one of the things I was struck by when I did go and work in Silicon Valley and then came back again was that every business I worked in over there, and there were a couple of them, they actively engaged incredibly proactively financially with their communities and supported charitable activities and brought their staff in a way that we see a little bit of in the big companies and maybe some of the medium size, but I don't see much of that as part of our culture. In Silicon Valley, at least, it was cultural. And I go back and think, well, I'm just trying to think why that was. And of course, ultimately, it's down to money, and they would get nice tax offsets. And maybe we need to play with some of those concepts. Actually, horrible to say with the Trumpian world right now, but there's some interesting lessons we could go look at from the American side that might be translatable into our society here and be constructive.
Okay, brilliant. Right, we've got a few specific questions that we'll rattle through quickly. So I'll do this one next, which is for Jeff. Would you think that the trust model could be used to vet human involvement in training programming AI to be safely used in the UK? That sounds like a fun one.
Right. So let's just, for those
quickly.
Okay, I'll try and do it quickly. So first of all, what is the trust model? Just very simply for everybody that hasn't engaged with that kind of thought process, it's based in three key building block elements. One is transparency about what you're doing. Second is accountability for what you've done. And thirdly, and this is the one which most businesses really struggle with, is empowerment of the people that you engage with to hold you to account, right? Responsibility, essentially. And very few businesses want to proactively do that component of any kind of engagement. But you think about a personal trust situation, that model translates whether it's to business, to your doctor and a patient. It's the same model, just interpreted in slightly different ways. So would it be a good way to, yeah. So I think the sort of, as somebody who's designed an AI system back in 1980 something when I designed a natural language understanding system for my degree dissertation, One of the things that we've learned since then, we did not know it then, that's for sure, is that the hidden assumptions that lie in the way people think as programmers appear in the code. And the problem with AI is you can't control where that goes. Because it's non-traceable. You cannot get back to why did AI come up with that answer. And the recognizing that kind of loop for the reality of the way AI operates and the way coders operate, it does, I think, raise a very interesting question as to, given the change that's coming in society with AI, and we don't know what it is, we just know it's going to be significant, perhaps we need anticipatory thought processes around the idea of, all right, why don't we give the AI developers trust and ethics training? I mean, for my company, because I wanted to build an organization that was building a digital platform that was ethical, I went and found the NHS Caldecott Principles, and there's a training course for that, and I put every one of my members of the team through that program. I said, if you don't understand what the patients and doctors have got to deal with, you can't program it. And I think that would equally apply to AI and the sort of generalizable case. Does that answer the question?
Not being an expert on trust models, it sounds great to me. So I'm going to go. Do you want to add something? Yeah.
I would just want to add on to that. I was nodding all the way through that because I agree with all of it. But you also absolutely need diversity of input. In order to design for inclusivity, as in design to avoid unfairness, oppression, exclusion, discrimination, all those nasty things that automation is exacerbating, the inputs to the design and thinking process to tackle those assumptions, they've got to come from a really broad range of participants. Give an example, when the Apple released their AirTags, women all over the world were suddenly like, great, thanks, now we're in even more danger, because the primary use case at first was people, well, guys, I'm afraid, planting them on women so they could follow them home. And the all-male development team at Apple went, gosh, we never thought of that. Whereas if they'd had a single woman on their team, it would have come up straight away. So that's not to say they're bad people. They're not bad people. It's just something outside their frame of reference. And so you need a really broad set of frames of reference in order to build for trust, accountability, and empowerment.
Superb. Right, I'm going to quickly ask, is there anything that anybody in the room would like to ask verbally or comment on? Because otherwise I'm going to do one last question, and I think we're going to wrap the panel. Yes, please, down the front.
Are we allowed?
Okay.
There's so many wide range of people here. I'd love to ask a really wide question. Who do you think is doing AI right, like company-wise? And who do you think is doing cybersecurity right? Like, let's not focus on the negative. Let's like be really positive people here. Like, who's doing a really good job?
Define right.
Right, so we probably won't do a name and shame approach, but I'll leave it to your own reference as to whether there's good practice you'd like to highlight.
For me, in the consumer world, when I was looking at the AI that was coming and how, because I'm a system architect more than an IT person, I like to design systems right. And I was looking at the AI thing and thinking, geez, there's going to be a world of problems with this unless we do it correctly. And when I thought about it, the safe way of doing it is to process on the device. So for me, if I could dictate to the world a better way of doing things, it would be client-side processing. You can build, the bottom line is you don't need all of the data all of the time to build a good AI system. You need enough data to build the initial system and guide it to a proper implementation. So you don't need to be continuously collecting everything that everybody does on AI all of the time just to improve your system by 0.0001%. You can get it pretty damn close without it. So, and then if you do that and you implement on the client side, the data remains there. The algorithm can evolve separately from that, but the data remains private, confidential to the individual. And if I wanted a societal value model, that would be the one I would look at. And that's the one that, in theory, Apple is trying to get to. They're not there yet, but they're moving in that direction. And I think as a principled approach, at least for the consumer part of society, that's what I would support.
I'd think about that question in terms of governance. So going back to the Cyber Governance Code of Practice, I think that's excellent guidance from DCIT for organisations. And I'd like to see that become a technology code of practice. So, you know, not thinking about AI, cyber, technology all separately, but yeah, starting to think holistically and thinking about technology governance and, you know, those bigger systems questions that I think we've all been touching on in the discussions.
I would say Rolls-Royce, because they really kind of started off industrial use of predictive analytics by tracking aircraft engine components in order to predict what was going to fail and when. And they did it exactly right in my view, because they took a very context-specific problem. They gathered the data that was specifically relevant to that context. They got experts to analyse it, and they built on that, and they never even once thought of pointing this at people.
Nice.
All great answers. I don't think I've got anything to add.
No, I obviously can't comment on individual companies, but what I would say is
Oh, go on.
the ones that give you the most transparency into how they do it, I think they're the ones that we really appreciate.
Yeah.
I don't feel confident to talk about AI, but I guess from a cyber perspective, I think projects in rail, I think, are doing a really good job at the moment, actually. Potentially controversially, HS2, I might argue, I think. If you're wondering why it's costing so much money, maybe it's the cyber. That's a joke, it's not. But that, you know, organisations like that, I think, are addressing it from a holistic perspective, and that, I think, is really positive. So I think UK Limited, really, UK PLC, is thinking about it. So I don't think we're doing a bad job. Clearly, we can do better. We can always do better, but I don't think we're doing a bad job.
Excellent. Okay, one last thing, and this can be rapid fire from your end all the way along. The one last, you know, if you could leave one lasting impression in the remaining audience and those online as we wrap up today, what do you want people to take away from this event, and particularly from your area of expertise, as something that they should be mindful of or take action on?
I think for me, it goes back to that last slide in my discussion, which is to mind that gap. It's thinking about that people, process and technology. Work with your colleagues to look for those gaps and plug them.
Not dissimilarly, stay engaged in the debate.
So don't try and reinvent the wheel. There's already good definitions of what doing a good job looks like, so pick a standard and follow it.
Don't be a git.
Secure by design is democratic by design.
Nice.
I would say finding ways to communicate that doesn't make cyber other from a societal point of view.
Yeah.
Because I think that's our core problem.
Great. Okay, I don't need that. You can answer that. I'd like to just ask you again, please, to thank our panel for their efforts and their travel and their participation. It's been really valuable and helpful. Thank you. You can escape from here and go back to your seats. Right, just from me then, really, a few closing comments. I'm not going to do a full rerun of the day, okay, in the next 10 minutes. But first, I'd just like to thank you for your attention and for your inputs and for your interesting questions, because it's the debate and the discussion that by which we go away having formed new ideas and able to collaborate and pass on further information to other people in our networks, okay? But just as a quick sort of, quick summary, what have we covered today? Well, hopefully, you've taken away something around our current state of policy, regulation, and the challenges in managing that within the UK at the moment through our sessions with DCIT and with Ofcom. We've looked at some really quite fascinating but shocking potential harms that come from the misuse of data, and we've discussed around what should we do to prevent those harms and how does that regulatory environment impact upon that. That was extremely useful and valuable this morning. We had a bit of a specific around the Online Safety Act, and we looked at end-to-end encryption as an example of something which is not quite as black and white as one might think, and we need to be looking in the shades of grey. And then this afternoon, we've really focused on that holistic approach to cyber by looking particularly within that health and safety parallel and also within the construction industry to say, actually, you know, there are real benefits to taking this approach. And so I think, you know, through the day, I'm hoping that the theme of how important cyber is in society, how we need to do our bit to break it out of its own little world and being the other and the silo, and making it seem as a mainstream event and its role in society is really important. So our responsibility together is to communicate that. It will remain the mission of the cluster, and we will continue to do that through our engagement and events and the like. What we'd ask of you is to do the same as well, but also to encourage other people to participate with us. You know, we're here, we want you to participate. We love the debate and we love the discussion. Arctic Wolf is our lead sponsor. I hope that many of you met that team today. Obviously the Data Protection Advisory Service, C3IA and Safe Space One, and for Exeter University and the team from Exeter University, and those folk at the back that have worked through our technical challenges during the day for making it possible. You've all done a great job and we're extremely grateful. So we could just show our thanks for them as well. Other than that, we will be obviously starting to use this material again on our feed. So if you're not on our YouTube and on the website and on the newsletters, please do sign up. You'll be able to find that connection on the website. And we look forward to engaging with you again at future events. My last thanks is again to our presenters and the panelists for their participation, because without them, it would be a very quiet day. So that's been fantastic. Thank you again. Please do travel safely and have a great weekend. For those of you at B-Sides, I might see you there. Okay, cheers.
Need some exit music.
Yes.
Exit music. Do, 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 do. Yeah, sorry. I could do karaoke or something.